All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first This Week in Crypto call in June of 2022 here. Boy, it's been a week of getting our hopes up and then being let down, right? It's a lot of kind of chopping action, a little bit of upward momentum, and then another mild fall like we just saw in the last 12 to 24 hours or so. We can see that over the last 7 days here, looking at the price returns, it's mostly flat outside of an amazing performance by Waves, which more than doubled. But it's a bit bittersweet because just a couple days ago, almost all of these projects were showing pretty substantial amounts of green as it was looking like markets were beginning to recover a tiny bit. But uh, obviously, in the last day or so, things dipped back down. Bitcoin fell back to the 29Ks once again, sitting at about 29.6, 29.7. Ethereum is back below 1800 again, sitting at 1760, and that is getting close to a year and a half low for that asset. And then we see a lot that had mild ups or mild downs. Pretty split as far as the top 100 altcoins go, but we see that social volume, especially, has taken a dip over the past week. Among the top 6 to 8 assets, it's just less and less discussions related to them. And instinctually, you may think this is a bad thing, but it's not. It's really a sign that less and less people are showing interest in the crypto markets while they're down, and that means we're inching closer and closer to capitulation. Capitulation sometimes happens just because of a huge price downswing, or it may happen because markets are getting boring, or it may happen because people are deciding they can no longer make money by investing in this market. And when that point happens, where there's enough blood in the streets, or doubt, or just overall negative sentiment toward crypto markets, which we'll get into on this call, that's when markets typically bounce up. We talked about last week how MVRVs were looking pretty low. They did bounce right afterwards until MVRVs became not so low. And then they kind of started chopping and falling back down again. There's also, of course, the correlation with the S&P 500 and several other aspects that we need to look into to figure out exactly how soon this bottom is happening. But overall, prices are kind of treading water a little bit, as we see over the past week, while social volume continues to drop. And we need to basically formulate all of this together and figure out exactly where prices are going to go next, how soon that's going to happen, and what we should look out for, such as mentions of buying the dip. Now, Maxim, you're here. Thanks for joining once again. We talked about this right before the call started. The mentions of buying the dip are continuing to stay pretty low, especially compared to what we saw at the early part of the month here. And now, every little mini dip, it's kind of just scoffed at. We had maybe a very, very mild spike as we saw the dip happen in the last 6 to 8 hours. But what's your opinion here on kind of the different waves of buying the dip? Because I know there was a great article put out within the past week.
Yeah, as long as the people talking and willing to buy the dip, it's more often than not, it's not yet the final dip. And we can pull for it social data, on-chain data, and sometimes the easiest way is the most efficient, not always. But in this case, it's easy, and you can always track desire by this simple query. Maybe then later on Gary can share it in the stream, the query, how you pull it up. And
it's just this button here, so super easy. It'll show up as a default option.
Okay, cool. And yeah, in a nutshell, it's encouraging sign we wrote about. We want to see the same behavior on on-chain data. It's not there yet. I don't know if you want to mention it during the call or not. But this alone is already good. We're glad to see it.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's relatively low. I mean, the picture here is worth 1,000 words. We saw, you know, the last time we were really this low on a consistent basis, we have to go back to maybe April of 2022 briefly, but even further back, since these are a bit taller, probably more like March, right? Late March. And that is when we actually had a local top. So dips weren't really relevant then. But when we were seeing like the big bounce, you know, it was back in mid-March, and we saw pretty similar low social volume spikes here with not a lot of interest.
And the key point, you measure it only when the price is making you low.
Right.
Making you low, you wait 12 to 24 hours, and then you make this query, because then it's a reaction of the crowd or mass participants to the law which just happened. How many have been discussions so far to buy the zip? And there is more detailed research you can build on top of it, but this is your initial point of view. You saw the new dip, we saw the new low, and at that date we saw beginning of this week, or quite on most coins actually, except I think Bitcoin and Binance Coin. We saw the new low. Okay, how the crowd is reacting.
Yeah. And we can also look at the counterpoint, which is the amount of mentions of short going on. We could even add in short or shorting or bearish and just see how that looks all together. And really, it's not telling too much of a story. Mentions are down overall, which is likely due to the fact that crypto Twitter and Telegram and Reddit, they're all a little bit lower in overall social volume, which I'll show in just a moment. But we're not seeing a significant increase like we were back here. You can see a lot of like isolated spikes happening near local tops. That's what we would want to see, because that means a lot of people are so doubtful in the crypto markets that they're actually betting against them rather than just being a passive participant. So that's something to keep an eye on. And as mentioned, we can also just type in an asterisk, which is going to bring up all mentions of social volume over any period of time you're looking at. And give it just a minute to load. There we go. So we can see very clearly that social volume is starting to get low to the point of where it was around the 21st. And really before that, there are very few moments where we're seeing social volume this low. You can see they fluctuate on kind of a day-to-day or hour-to-hour basis almost. But if we were able to draw a trend line on this chart, it would very clearly be sloping downward over the past month, probably over the past 2 months or so, or a month and a half at least. So less and less people interested. And we can also break it down by platform and look at Telegram, Reddit, or Twitter altogether. Reddit's probably the most telling. You can see as time has gone on throughout the month, since the big drop, the overall social volume on crypto platforms for Reddit are just continuing to slide. Twitter a little bit too. We can see a little bit of a slope there. And then Telegram has been pretty dead for about a month and a half now. My opinion on why Telegram has dropped so much is it is the most prone to major participants coming in during bull markets and leaving during bear markets, because there's a greater sense of anonymity than you can have even on Reddit and Twitter. Like there's probably a little bit of post history you can look at on Reddit, or an actual avatar, and some post history on Twitter too. But Telegram, you're really just using your phone number and keeping everything about you pretty secret, and that's how pump and dump groups and shill groups get so much traction on this platform. So who isn't very interested in pump and dump and shill groups right now are Telegram users, because they don't feel there's much point in them when markets continue to drop. And with that, I like to look at kind of Reddit probably the most, because they seem to have They seem to have the mantra of buying dips and selling profits the most of the three. Twitter's more in the middle. And right now, it just appears that these two main ones are continuing to drop in terms of crypto interest. And the more it drops, the more likely whales can scoop up more crypto at a small price without much resistance. All right, so why don't we get into some of the on-chain metrics here? We'll go over Bitcoin as usual, but I want to give plenty of time for altcoin requests and just various questions you guys may have on this stream. By the way, once again, we had a Sandbase Pro webinar. The early part of this week, we will be having a free webinar coming up in about a week and a half. Mark your calendars. It'll be on Wednesday. I believe, let me check the calendar. That would be the 15th. So get ready for that. And we'll be discussing whales among some other subjects. So get any questions ready for that as well. And I will move on to some Bitcoin metrics and also prepare to give Gary here, our stream mod for the day, a few recommendations for altcoins you'd like to check out. So without further ado, here's what we're looking at in terms of circulation for Bitcoin right now. Pretty much a continuation from last week. We talked about how there was this nice rise going on. And with this nice rise, it means that there is more overall utility in terms of unique tokens moving from address to address than there really has been in at least the last 6 months, or I should say for almost a year now. We really haven't seen circulation this high. And if it continues, it's going to be a very, very good sign that markets can turn around big once they finally do. I mean, we're up near a year and a half high. The last time the 30-day trend line was this high was January of 2021. So that gives you quite a picture of just how much things are rising despite the falling prices. And as you would imagine, if we look over on our NVT model, we see a nice bright green bullish signal that is finalized for the month of May. We'll have June up after we have more than just 2 days worth of data. But for now, we can clearly see that this was the first time we saw a clear bullish divergence in terms of the unique amount of tokens moving on the BTC network since going back to December 2017. So that's a pretty major milestone. And it's a good sign to see that ever since the decline started in November, after we hit that all-time high, it's really been a semi-bullish story. And May has now indicated that we've jumped into the straight up bullish range for the first time. And the way this is calculated, it's looking at the all-time trend line right here in blue for NVT. And then we've got a 6-month, 11-month, and 16-month smooth moving average that's going to fluctuate based on how high or low these bars are. And if the current bar is below 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these bars, that's how you end up with a bearish, semi-bearish, neutral, semi-bullish, or bullish divergence. And now we're actually below all 4. It's usually the big obstacle is this blue all-time high line or all-time line. And we're actually below that right now, which is pretty shocking because the blue line has risen, but not nearly as much as these other trend lines here. So considering we're below that now, really says a lot about how much circulation is happening on the network. So that may not be the definitive sign that things are going to turn around. As you can tell, it's a very long-term signal, but it is encouraging to see. We'd be a lot more concerned if the circulation was staying pretty low like this as prices were dropping. But this dip is drawing quite a bit of interest right now in terms of actual trades. It may not be drawing as much social volume interest, but that doesn't matter nearly as much as circulation. In fact, as we said, social volume declining is probably more a good thing than bad. So really a good thing on the social end and very good thing on the circulation end right now. Now moving on, we can look at daily active addresses, which is more or less treading water, not quite looking as optimistic as circulation, but it's not falling either. So this is probably a neutral divergence, and there really isn't much more to say about that. The amount of unique addresses moving on the BTC network continues to be fine, but not overwhelming. Now, MVRV, always a good topic to discuss. We saw for the first time since late April, Bitcoin actually jumped in, Bitcoin's MVRV jumped into positive territory. And as soon as it did, boom, it just fell right back. And really, this was the sign that Bitcoin traders could take a very quick profit on average based on 30-day returns. And I would presume that they did. We'll take a look at the ratio of profit loss here later on the call. But this likely was due to, or once it happened, I should say, the fact that there was a profit-taking opportunity for the average trader over the past 30 days, they likely took advantage of that and sent the MVRV right back into negative territory. And now it's sitting right at about neutral, negative 0.7%. So relatively speaking, not much higher risk or lower risk than usual. It's pretty much right on that midpoint. And if we look,
either way.
Yeah, you think it's probably going to move very high or very low for the next big movement, Maxim?
Well, very unlikely. MVRV in Bitcoin, because of its very major. I mean, this is the most major coin. It doesn't move so wild like for other coins. But if you're playing from the risk-reward approach, if you're trading, then typically better to wait till it gets, I don't know, 10% at least. Then you can try play something. Unless you played momentum. If you played momentum, like continuation from, okay, this is another game. What are we talking about if you try to play from reversal point of view?
Right. And there's also the argument of potentially just scaling in buys and scaling in sells the higher or lower we go on the MVRV, right? So let's say you're 100% out once it goes above 15% and 100% in once it goes to negative 15%, which is right there. So, let's say that the zero line would be your halfway point in your portfolio. And the lower we go, the more you're scaling in buys. And if it drops back or jumps back up, then you want to start scaling in profit taking, selling limit orders of some type. And it can be hard because MVRV doesn't exactly fluctuate with price all the time. You can see all the time, MVRV going up right here, despite prices sliding very gradually down. That's rare and it won't happen all the time, but it's something to keep in mind. And you would really want to keep a very close eye on MVRV if you're going to make your strategy based solely on this, which I wouldn't recommend. I'd recommend, combining it with things like NVT and whales and MVRV and lots of other things out there. But overall, it's never the worst strategy to kind of place your risk and how much you are willing to bet on the markets moving up or down by just how much the 30-day MVRV has slid. And now we can look at the MVRV divergence chart. Not all of them have loaded, but that's okay. I'm not going to give it 2 to 3 minutes of refresh time. I'll just show you that most of the altcoins right now are very close to or above the underbought opportunity zone line here. And that means that when you combine the 1, 7, 30, 90, 180, and 365-day MVRVs all together, so looking at short, midterm, and long-term timeframes, you can see that people are pretty underwater regardless of time frame right now. Even with the all-time high happening about 7 months ago, within that 1 year time frame, you can still see that the 1 year, we go here, ignore because it's not completely filled, never mind. But you can tell on these dark lines, the last one of each grouping, these are the 1 year divergences, and they're all basically showing underbought because traders have a propensity to buy near tops and sell near lows. So they're not up as much as just a hodler would be over the past 7 months. And that's a good thing. That means obviously we're humans and we feel bad for others who are losing money. But in terms of our opportunities, when others are in serious pain, like they are here on the 1 year, pretty much all time frames, that's a better than average time to be in. And yes, we have Bitcoin sitting at more of a modest semi underbought signal right now, where the 30-day divergence is barely above zero. That's okay. It simply means that we need to, as Maxim said, need to see a big push one way or another, whether it's a big MVRV spike going positive or spike going negative. Any other things to add to the MVRV conversation here, Max?
No, just this key points that it's different absolute values you need to keep in mind while comparing Bitcoin and Ethereum with I don't know, Cardano, and then going down the list to something that just appeared. You know, when any coin making the first cycle, excitement pump and depressing dump, it can go as high as 200, 300% in both directions. Whereas the next cycle, as participants of this coin community will be better prepared. They will not let it pump so much. They will start exiting earlier. Bitcoin went through 3 cycles already, 3 big ones. Now it's the first one. So it's volatility is still here, but on MVRV, which is normalizing, a lot of volatility already out. We see these lower values. So need to take into account when we say 10-15% for Bitcoin. Don't apply it to some smaller coins. You will just get burned very fast.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know, speaking of metrics that you can combine with things like MVRV, how about weighted sentiment and what it looks like right now? Yeah, we saw that MVRV was definitely able to jump back to even, but that's not the case with trader sentiment right now. This is, of course, a very, very short sample size on the new week, which starts every Friday. But you can see that right now, just over the first, 12 hours, 10 hours of, 14 hours about where I am from where the week started, we're sitting at the most negative that traders have been in almost 2 years. I think probably would be over 2 years if we go, let's say, all the way to 2019. Yeah, so pretty much since Black Thursday, that was the last time we saw sentiment lower than where it is right now in the early part of this week. Now we're gonna have to see how it plays out as more and more data pours in this week, but it is the fifth straight week of negative sentiment. And at least for the past 3 weeks in total, they were extremely negative to the point where they really hadn't seen anything like it since, arguably right here in September, and before that, Black Thursday. So traders are very, very down right now, and they don't seem to want to show.
You can read it everywhere.
Go ahead.
No. It's actually, I want to say that there is a confirmation of how this metric is calculated. When you read, now finally, we get rid of all this buying the dips, and we will get to 100,000 or to 1 million, not to say even 1 million. This different fundamental reasons, and Salvador is buying. Most of it is gone. And it shows in the metric. I'm happy to see. I didn't check it for a few days. And now I see it went very low, and it corresponds to what I'm reading. So quite cool. Kudos to our developers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
On this line, at least I didn't see the last 2 days mentions of fear and greed indicator, which was mentioned last or 2 weeks ago. Oh, we're in extreme fear. Looks like we were not in extreme fear. Now I guess in there, at least according to our indicator.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely qualifies as extreme fear right now. There are many people that very much believe that this is not the bottom and we are going to go way, way lower. Could be 20K. I've seen many people calling for 15K. But whatever it ends up being, uh, eventually there will be some sort of relief bounce. And we want to watch out for any sort of euphoric types of sentiment. We want people to stay down even when things start to bounce, which they sort
Yeah,
of,
and this is the key.
yeah, and they sort of did
Uh-huh.
here. Uh-huh.
Yeah, this is the key. What I want to say, the moment we will go up eventually, it will definitely happen. Now, then it will be the few key metrics to observe. One is weighted social sentiment. Just keep in mind that it's calculated on a daily basis. So you can, during the day, the data is being gathered and measured. So during the day, whatever you see as the latest value, it fluctuates. It's not final one. Okay? So always take for the day before. Just showing you or explaining how to use the indicator. Now, if we witness the price going up sizable, at least 5 to 10%, and we still stay low on weighted sentiment, and we still have ideally negative to neutral funding rate, I think we will come to it. Yeah, and MVRV around 0 below us, it will be. I will be glad to see it, but you never know what the market gives you, what it can give you. But the importance of this metric is twofold. Right now it's negative, it's good. It's a good as preliminary marker, and it will become even better if we see increase in price and it still stays low.
Yeah, I think we really want to keep an eye on this metric, as Maxim said, as prices stay low, or if they continue to fall off, are people suddenly going to be optimistic and want to buy the dip? There are so many factors that vary in. And remember, we haven't even touched on the correlation to the equities markets yet, which we will do after this very briefly. But that factors in a lot. You know, if stocks are falling along with crypto, it's likely going to just continue to be a lot of passivity as people wait for any sign of any market to allow them to make money again. If stock markets start to rise and crypto falls, people are going to be extremely negative. And then if stock markets really fall and crypto stays where it is now, which would be the least likely scenario based on patterns so far this year, then there would probably be a little bit of positivity where people are going, oh, well, at least crypto isn't falling the way markets are because of inflation and the dollar dropping as much as it has. All hail crypto, right? That's the kind of stuff you might see. But really, what we want to see is continued negative sentiment pile up like it is right now, and it's just going to make a better and better case for an eventual bounce. So as I mentioned, we'll take a quick look at the correlation here because it's shown signs of a little bit of breakaway. Let's do just the last 3 months, but then it'll quickly snap back together. So this is what I'm talking about right here. Notice how the S&P between the 24th through the 27th really had an amazing stretch, while Bitcoin did not. And once the weekend hit, which is this flat line here for the S&P, obviously they can't move while the markets are closed, while Bitcoin is never closed. That is when Bitcoin made up a lot of ground and they started climbing over the weekend until the 31st. And then, boom, they locked back together and are now basically in parallel once again, where they fell, they rose again yesterday, and now they've fallen again so far today. The S&P 500 is having a pretty rough day today thus far, but it's only an hour into the 6.5 hour long markets, so there could be time for things to turn around. And I would fathom that if they do, especially heading into the weekend, crypto will follow, or we'll have something sort of similar to what we had last week, where crypto stays kind of silent and the S&P potentially rises, and then we see the weekend where Bitcoin makes up for it. And it could happen on the downside too. If the S&P falls a little more today and Bitcoin stays where it's at, you might want to be careful of a little more pain coming for the crypto markets this weekend after they close. And then, even gold, they're kind of staying in tandem right now. People talk about gold as the historic hedge sector to look into when economic opportunities in the S&P 500 aren't really presenting themselves, but it's not really showing anything right now either. So it's a very interesting time right now in the world in terms of what you can invest in that's actually going to generate a positive return. Yes, some of you may be thinking, well, I could always short the markets. Well, let's take a look at what that looks like and see how average funding rates are looking between longs and shorts right now. You look at the average funding rate. This is only combining right now FTX and DYDX. We could include Binance, but the reason I'm not is because we want to look at it from an hour by hour perspective instead of every 8 hours, because Binance only updates 3 times a day instead of 24 times a day. But looking at just these two, you can see a pretty good picture going on. Obviously, when these spikes get really high, that's when we start seeing local tops. We haven't seen any real moments where there have been very negative funding rates. This is really the third time over the past month that we've seen funding rates this low. So people are very much shorting as of just the past hour or so. So keep that in mind for your very short-term swing traders out there. If we look at the past 3 months, we see that there was a lot of shorting going on. And eventually, look at this, right when it rose into positive territory, that's when we finally had that big drop off. And then of course we had the big extreme polarizing funding rates where it was changing hour by hour. But look at extremes really, and you'll find some fascinating stuff. We can't do a 30-day moving or 30-hour moving average on this, but I can tell you that, right here, the funding rates were gradually moving down, and once it started shorting, there was at least a little bit of relief, right? And this is normal. When you see funding rates really high for an extended period of time, that's when you want to be careful because greed is starting to take over. When they get really low, that's when people are fearful and want to get out of or bet against Bitcoin. And that's when those liquidations on the short end can actually act as rocket fuel to propel us upwards, like we were with a lot of shorts happening here. So funding rate wise, it's been kind of a Jekyll and Hyde story for really the last 3 months or so, most of 2022, in fact. We can look all the way back to December of last year. That's funny that we have extremes because there were a few huge outliers in the very beginning of December. I'll go right after just so they don't skew the axis. So yeah, we can clearly see when it was positive. This was about a month after the all-time high. Boom, big drop off. We finally got negative here. Look at that, we start to rise. And then it was kind of a chop fest, maybe a little more negativity here, and that's when things rose. And then a little more chopping both directions, a little more positive here, falls, a little more negative here, rises, so on and so forth. I mean, right now it's probably been a little more positive than we would want to see, and probably that's contributing to Bitcoin not being able to recover. We did see a little bit of a recovery here, but funding rates are still pretty positive up until really the past 24 hours where it's kind of neutralized and we're right in the middle once again. So anything can happen, and I really recommend this as a top 3 metric to keep an eye on right now for the next time we start to see bunches of negative or bunches of positive start to form. You're also welcome to kind of make it a little more digestible and less noisy. You can go to 1 day and see a little more of a story. This is just the averages once per day. You see when it's really negative, really positive. And, this is key right here. This is what we've been seeing for the last 3 weeks or so. Way too much interest in buying the dip, even though the social trends may not see it because there's less overall participants talking right now. We clearly see that as far as where people are putting their money where their mouth is, they're betting long right now. And yes, we're finally back in neutral territory, which is a good thing after this drop, but it's not enough for us to see some clear fear, which would be the golden opportunity to get in cheap. So that is funding rate. We'll do a few more metrics. I definitely want to cover whales. Why don't we drop, we'll jump straight over to that actually. So we'll go here. I'm going to change this to USD coin instead of USDT tether, because we clearly see the trend of lots of whale accumulation on the USDC side. For those of you who have tuned into our past few streams, we've talked about how it's kind of the polar opposite on the tether end, where there's a ton of whales that have gotten out of their huge tether positions and mostly moved on to USDC and DAI, where we see, yes, it's kind of stayed flat for the past, 3 weeks now. It feels like it hasn't been that long, but considering this long-term upswing here, it looks like there's still plenty of buying power on the markets, but they're just no longer on the tether side. They're in USDC and DAI, and they're sitting at about 31% of overall USDC held. That was, I think, the most ever. No, I take that back. My apologies. The most since January of 2021. So we're talking about a 1.5 year high in terms of whale buying power with USDC. We can also look at DAI since I've mentioned it. And it's pretty much the same thing, about a 1.5 year high or so, since DAI's was over 30% or so. So right around the same as USDC. And as I mentioned, Tether, pretty much the exact opposite. This huge downswing here brought it to pretty much the whales holding $100,000 to $10 million addresses holding at least $100,000 to $10 million dollars in Tether are at their lowest point pretty much since Genesis. So that's a pretty big deal there, folks. Now, if we look at just the last, we'll do the last 6 months for the gold line, get rid of Tether for a minute so we can focus solely on Bitcoin. We're seeing a bit of encouragement. You know, we had this slight rise. It kind of gave up half of that accumulation. And then in the last 24 hours, another sign of accumulation. So that is nice to see. It isn't major by any stretch. I mean, look at where we were 6 months ago compared to now. But at least the hemorrhaging of Bitcoin dropping out of these whale wallets has taken a pause for the past 10 days or so. And heading into the weekend, we'll see how whales react to another mild dip that's occurred today. And who knows how Friday is going to play out by the end of the day. But we do see enough encouraging signs to show that, you know, with NVT and MVRV, there's a little meat on the bone for things to rise more than there is to fall. And then we'll watch and see if whales actually start to move back up toward 48% of supply held, or if they drop to 6-month lows and get below 41%, far beyond 6-month lows. This is the first time really since October of 2020 that we saw things this low held by the whales. Anything you want to add in terms of whale accumulation and dumping, Maxim?
Yeah, not much. I just, for me, at the current stage, it's more not as important as before. Still pay attention. The key is still weighted sentiment, pounding rates, and social search, which we discussed at the beginning. But we'll definitely pay attention to. I still try. Yeah, I didn't come up with an idea what's happening to their holdings. Initially, I thought when they were decreasing, okay, maybe they aped into some other promising projects. There've been quite a lot, raising money here and there, dedicating money to different, still considered to be interesting projects. But now, I don't know. Now, actually, everyone should be on the defense line. So they decrease it. Maybe the last decrease we are seeing here might be indeed they took some profits to prepare just in case it stays for 1 year or two. Bear market, they have money to pay taxes and everything to have runaway. I don't know, yeah, because this decline is quite steep, yeah, compared to what before. It was like gradual.
Oh yeah.
And now it's quite steep. So it's definitely not for the purpose of investing into anything else. Yeah, I don't think they're so stupid to put in such environment into even more risky things. So probably they made some buffer, some stable coin or fiat buffer. Yeah, which if you think contrarily in behavior point of view, it's a kind of not a bad sign. So we're in a capitulation phase. But yeah, eventually they should start increasing. By the way, if you're here, I don't know if you have on Sun-based Bitcoin dominance. It's been increasing since maybe 2-3 weeks. It's actually also very interesting data, but I'm not sure if we have
Price dominance?
a Bitcoin dominance. I don't think we have it.
You mean on the price side, not social, right?
Yeah. Market cap dominance.
Yeah, we could look at that
Okay.
in just a moment. I was going to say
we can prepare it for the next time, but just it's kind of coincides, yeah.
Yeah, and we can look at the volume side, which is somewhat similar and shows a lot of dominance on Bitcoin. But the last point I wanted to make on whale behavior is I still think there might be a bit of a hangover from the Terra Luna situation where they're funding. I forget the terminology, but they sold all of their Bitcoin. Basically got completely out, and that probably had something to do with all of this hemorrhaging. I can't say confidently because we haven't looked at all the specific addresses and how they lined up with this drop, but there's still a lot of distrust with just the Terra Luna situation, the USTC situation, of course. As you guys know, that coin is pretty much defunct. It's known as USTC now. It's so defunct because it used to be known as UST, and they had to switch it to US Terra USD Classic, and it's still way below $1. Obviously, Tether is causing some concern from the whales. And whales, you know, when you think about it, when you own, let's say you own $100 million in crypto overall, and suddenly you're hearing that Tether, which you probably own some of when you have that much crypto, is now down to 95 cents when it's supposed to always be at $1. And this just happened right after Terra USD moved to nothing, essentially. It's like 2 cents or so. I'd be really worried just about the state of crypto overall when that much of my stablecoin holdings have just dropped when, you know, that's the part that's not supposed to move, right? Bitcoin is supposed to be the thing that fluctuates up and down, and we can all handle it, and we're used to the cycles. But if our stable coins are moving, that can cause people holding Bitcoin and other, you know, Ethereum, XRP, whatever it is, it causes the holders of the main crypto assets to hesitate and maybe hold off on accumulating when they otherwise would have, because there's just so much uncertainty around the top stablecoin in the world still, which USDT very much is. So that's kind of my theory as to why things are a bit stagnant still. I think there's a bit of a hangover, and as you know, some time elapses with Tether staying back at $1, we'll likely start to see a bit of confidence coming back to the markets. So as I mentioned, trading volume, because Maxim brought up a great point about Bitcoin dominance. We'll prepare like an actual chart showing the dominance of Bitcoin next time we share with everyone on this call. But for now, I can show you something better than how it's looking right now. Give me a moment as I make the price a little more clear. I'm going to switch to 1 year and shared access. There we go. So the green here is the Bitcoin trading volume week by week. Blue is Ethereum trading volume. And then these small ones like orange would be Solana when it was having its heyday in September. This gold was Cardano, which was also having a great time back then. Those have really diminished in previous weeks. You know, we saw a little bit from Binance Coin in early May, but other than that, most altcoins are completely squashed here, while Ethereum and Bitcoin are just overwhelming dominant favorites right now. We could see here, this was the biggest trading volume day since Black Thursday in March of 2020. And then we just finished the second biggest. I guess technically we had this one here, but this was the second biggest since the all-time high and second biggest of 2022. So that is very notable and shows that, you know, even during what was a pretty flat week after the big dip opportunities, or how they appeared to be, happened at the beginning of the month, 3 weeks later, we suddenly saw a pretty big trading volume week without much movement going on. But it is showing that Bitcoin and Ethereum are head over heels above everything else, head over shoulders above everything else right now. And I would anticipate that this won't change much until altcoins show a little consistency on some consistent price rises, because right now it's showing that people are pretty hesitant to move in or out of them. It's just a lot of stagnancy happening right now. So don't be surprised if Bitcoin's dominance and maybe a little bit Ethereum's dominance continue to grow above the rest of the coin options out there. All right, so with this said, guys, why don't we jump into some questions so we can get a solid 20 to 25 minutes on anything that we've shown or some specific altcoins you guys would like to go over.
So, of course, the only token in chat visible now is the FTT token, an FTX exchange native token.
Sure, yeah.
Sure, yeah, FTX, absolutely. So FTX, for those who don't know, it's there's a global version of the site and also a US version of the site. The exchange has really gotten a lot more attention over the last 6 months. There's here in the US, there's an NBA court named after it in Miami. And FTX, if I can switch over to the BTCF chart here, which gives me all of the key metrics. So FTX is, of course, an ERC20, which allows us to look at everything from circulation to MVRV to whale behavior.
Brian, excuse
and we'll
me.
start here with
Brian,
circulation to see.
Can we check the ticker?
Yeah.
It should be FTT, not FTX.
Excuse me. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's confusing, as you would imagine, where the coin FTX is Fintrux network, and then FTX token is FTT. So appreciate that. I would have gone down a rabbit hole with the wrong coin. So FTT here, we had a big circulation spike just yesterday. It was the biggest since May 11th, and before that, we hadn't seen spikes this big since January. Circulation spikes don't appear to have huge impact to occur a lot during local tops, which we haven't seen any local tops occur over the past month or so. We do see that the overall 30-day circulation is up and is around a 1 year or 2022 high right now, just barely, because of the amount of spikes going on. So that shows there's a little bit of added utility happening on the network right now. I wouldn't say it's an overwhelming amount, because these spikes here back in December and September respectively were way higher. Let's take a look at daily active addresses. It doesn't look like there's a ton going on here. It's mostly just been a continued downtrend of less and less overall addresses interacting on the network on a daily basis. The huge spike, of course, occurred at the all-time high back in September. This was around the same time Solana and Cardano were blasting off. But nothing really too encouraging to see. You know, this isn't really anything of a sizable spike, just a very mild one. So utility-wise, circulation and daily active addresses don't really have anything special happening. As far as the 30-day MVRV goes, I can mark the negative 15% line right there. And we are about halfway down now at about negative 7.5%. So it is a less risky time than usual to enter into or add on to your position for FTT, but it is not in a historic opportunity zone like we saw here, where we very temporarily bounced, or here where it was the beginning of a very nice sizable bounce. That's what we would be looking for in order to feel confident in enough trader pain happening on the FTT network to comfortably get in and know that there's a very good chance of making a profit. Happened here, happened here. These were all pretty good times to get in, at least temporarily. And as long as you're in while the MVRV is below -15% for FTT, you tend to be in during bottoms. So that's a good thing. Alternatively, you obviously want to make sure you're not in when the MVRV is at plus 50% or even plus 30% or even, you know, anything above 10%. It looks to be a pretty risky time. So watch out for that and know that we are in, like I said, a better opportunity zone than usual right now, but not one that is of historical significance. Weighted sentiment, pretty neutral, nothing really to say. We had a huge euphoric spike in mid-April that did not go well at all, which is pretty much how things normally go. And then a ton of people buying the dip here, and that didn't work out either. So, you know, not a perfect predictor by any means. And it's important to stay accountable and show when things did not always work out for weighted sentiment. But I'd call this an anomaly, and I'd still say, you know, a stretch like this, where there's a lot of negative sentiment toward FTT, you're going to do pretty well most of the time if you're in while things are negative, especially when it's multi-week like this.
Brian, can you check social volume? I've been reading last few days. It looked like more than usual, but I'm not sure if it was just my subjective perception. Okay.
It doesn't look like anything special, maybe on a very short-term basis. So like if we zoom into the past month, a little bit of a rise, I guess, but no, I'm not seeing anything too crazy here.
Okay.
Maybe it was like hour by hour you were looking at or something, but yeah, nothing too crazy for FTT right now.
Can you try social volume AI just to see maybe we're catching up also related topics to FTX?
Yeah, and maybe Max, if you wouldn't mind explaining just how this metric works, because I'm still getting familiar with it. How does social volume AI differ
I think
from
what
regular social?
Yeah, what it does in different from social volume. In the social volume, we spotting some keywords. Now in social volume AI, what we are doing is there is some algorithm behind, and when the token is mentioned with some specific other words and it keeps repeating, so we can catch up and count it as a volume for this token, if even it's only the specific keywords which are not anymore token name itself. So at times it could be more precise representation of, let's say, talks increase when people are talking more. And they're talking on topic related to this coin without mentioning the coin name itself. This is our goal.
So it's more one-off subjects of FTT.
Yes, exactly. Because FTT, it's like it's FTX and maybe Alameda. So it can be some connected topics, not exactly. Yeah. Can even be Solana. I don't know. Like people can start connecting different topics. So I was wondering if it's catching up, but I'm not sure if it's a system needs to learn too over time.
Yeah, really nothing special going on the social volume AI side, but like you said, there could be some learning curve for the AI before it starts to really connect a newish token like FTT to some specific subjects where you'll start to see some spikes. Whatever happened here, there was a very big spike on February 17th, but it was kind of just during a choppy time. So social metrics don't look to be too special. We did see a big spike in dormant coin movement here on June 1st. So a lot of coins that hadn't moved in a while suddenly moved addresses. This was the third largest spike in the past 6 months. Typically, you'll see these spikes happen more during local tops, but because there really haven't been much opportunities for local tops, you're really just seeing a few isolated spikes here and there right now. ratio of transaction volume and profit to loss. Let me zoom in just to the last 2 weeks and see if there's anything here. So we want to look for days below 1.0. So 1.0 would be the even line, right about there. So anything below this means there's more capitulation happening than profit taking. The big profit taking stretch happened from the 28th all the way until June 2nd. And I guess just as of today, we're starting to see a little bit of loss starting to accrue once again. We want to see some consistent, lines below the 1.0 line, and that would be a sign that people are really capitulating a lot. But remember that this is going to be correlated with what Bitcoin is doing. And if Bitcoin's profit to loss is kind of treading water, then we would need to see like some real extremes here, like 10 times the profits compared to losses. And that would really be an excellent signal. Or 5 times more lost transactions than profits. That would be a great signal of a bottom. But right now, nothing too extreme. Whale transaction count, nothing too crazy. We saw, like a lot of coins after this drop, there was a bit of a spike in whales trying to accumulate here. And, arguably they successfully did so very short term. But then this drop off has shown that whales have been pretty silent. Remember that this is the kind of the deader part of the day, and things will really start to heat up in the next 2 to 4 hours. So we'll see how whales react to this dip right here. And I recommend looking at both the 100K and 1 million plus whale transaction count metric here on Sandbase. And that's about it on FTT. It doesn't, I guess one more thing we can look at is supply distribution, of course. And with FTT sitting at about $26, that would mean that whales are mostly going to be in this region, 10K all the way up to 1 million coins held. And there isn't a whole lot of accumulation happening. Go to the last year. Yeah, so they were really dumping hard after an accumulation phase. They were actually accumulating into the dip from April all the way up until early May. And then once the big dip happened here after the FOMC announcement, in announcing that inflation was rising, or interest rates are rising, excuse me, that's when they really started to dump hard, and they went from holding 5.6% of tokens all the way down to 3.6% of tokens. So not a great sign there, and I'm not really seeing too many great signs about FTT at the moment. So appreciate the suggestion, and sorry we don't have better news to report. So what else do we have, Gary? Why don't we look at another one?
Of course, we have two great options. It's Solana and Binance.
We'll look at Solana. So fair warning, it's not an ERC20, so all of these are going to be grayed out. We don't have the main metrics, but we do have things like weighted sentiment. And if we take a look at weighted sentiment, we see that as expected, around the all-time high, lots of euphoric spikes, a lot of people trying to buy the dip here, and it didn't go too well for them. Huge euphoric spikes on the way up. This is when Solana was really just getting introduced to the audience, the mainstream audience for the first time. Major negativity here from January all the way until late March, and that was where you wanted to buy the dip because everyone was so negative. Things got euphoric here, like a lot of other coins, and prices dropped. People tried to buy the dip here, didn't really work too well. And now we're actually slightly in positive territory. It looks like people are viewing this Solana drop as a mild opportunity. We'd rather them be very fearful, like we're seeing for Bitcoin, and having a weighted sentiment spike down here right now. So probably not a great sign that the crowd is expecting prices to jump back up from here. It does look like prices are sitting with this drop down to, looks like $38. It's the lowest it's been since August right now. So we're talking about a 10-month low in price. And that's significant as well. So if there was any support here for UTA traders, it just broke below that. And that's fascinating as well. Anything else we can see? We won't have whale data. Development activity we do have, if we look at the past year, we see that things have been falling a bit since mid-December. It's certainly a very high developed coin. So 124, 125 GitHub submissions per day happening right now. That's one of the better assets out there. Probably top 20 in terms of, maybe even top 10 in terms of overall development for a coin. So in terms of long term, you might be very satisfied with holding on to Solana for a long period of time, based on the fact that their team is constantly renovating and innovating, trying to make their project better. It's usually a good sign if you're seeing 100 plus submissions per day for a coin that is still very polarizing like Solana. But keep in mind that, you know, development activity is not going to be a leading indicator for swing traders on a week-to-week basis. It's more of a validator that a project is able to grow over time as the coders are working on it. Do you agree with that, Max?
I definitely agree with it. And we need to take into account the fundamentally bad things happening with Solana. It was stopped for 5 hours or so last night or last day. And actually, it's a good sign. I mean, technologically, things can be fixed, and they're normally fixed sooner or later. We need to see more negative traction in social media and crypto. So that people, some of them, of course, already trashing Solana for being exactly this 5 times already. What kind of blockchain is this if you stop it? Now, but you always consider appearance of the bad news or bad events after a long downside as a good sign. This is how it should work. You have inflow of great news around the top, and everything is look bad, and everything can only go down around the bottoms. And we've been discussing today in our team circle kind of investment thesis for us internally. And I will not go into too much details, but for Solana, actually, we saw, especially if it gets to $24. Right now, I think it's 34 or 36. What is the price current?
It's at 38.
38, yeah, exactly. So if it managed to go 24, this is, I mean, not investment device, but for us internally, definitely buy. Yeah, we'll see. Because of many things we discussed, like the pattern, time, and many things.
And we are seeing a social dominance spike here as well. This is the highest social dominance we've seen.
Yeah, everyone likes to talk about
2022
about bad things, you know. They attract negative attention, which is okay. I mean, I've seen it so many times. Project just before turning around out of nowhere, everyone is talking bad about them. And I'm expecting transition, some negative news for Ethereum, because it also built quite nice setup, but it just we're lacking really bad news. With every small price increase for Ethereum, we get immediately this merge and flipping. Just it doesn't let it grow. I would wish some negative news, like it will never merge, we will never get our proof of stake, forget about trading. If we see this, it will be ideal. But it's another side. We like for Solana, it's very close, if not already in a sweet spot. Yeah. I personally waiting for 24, but let's see if it gets there. It's not the first time I'm waiting for something, but it doesn't go exactly to my buy point.
Yeah, I consider the closer it gets to a support line like that, the more likely a bounce will occur. I think that's the best way to look at it, because often on the TA side, if you wait for that exact moment, if everyone else is aware of that exact moment too at 24, then a lot of people get antsy around the $27 to $29 range and suddenly stack in a bunch of money and push the price up all of a sudden before all the people waiting for that exact dollar amount are left with the dollars in their hands waiting to inject into the coin. So if you try to be too precise in crypto, you often get burned. But we do see historically, when social dominance spikes on a fall, it can often lead to price bounces. It's been the case with many altcoins over the years. And right now, with social dominance showing a gradual rise and being about 3.5% of discussion rates right now, it means that there's some interest on a lot of this negative news revolving around Solana. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was at least a relief bounce to make all of the negative social dominance start to dissipate and be left with either less social dominance overall, or the mentions of Solana start to get positive again because prices are rising. So very interesting. And obviously as a top 10 coin, it's always worth keeping a close eye on. And that should be about it on Solana because it's not an ERC20. So sorry for the limitation on what we can show, but hopefully that was helpful for you, whoever suggested it. Why don't we take one more project and then we'll wrap up the stream here, Gary.
Sure it's an ERC20.
Let's make sure it's an ERC22.
One option is Binance Coin, actually not an ERC20 as we know.
Mm-hmm.
But
coincidentally we do have Binance Coin metrics, so that's fine. And what would be the other one?
Is also alternative blockchain. It's ICP token, Internet Computer.
Yeah, so that
we won't have much on. Yeah. Really quickly while we're here, we'll just run down at least the social stuff and the development activity. So development activity is looking pretty good. ICP is also one of the more highly developed assets in crypto, sitting at about 92 GitHub submissions per day. And remember, this isn't just Slack messages and useless GitHub activity. This is only stuff that our algorithm deems notable for ICP in its development. So it's good to see that it's staying up high. It got all the way up to about 155 submissions back just about 2 weeks ago. So that's great to see as well. Overall, it's on the rise. So that's nice to see. It's probably sitting close to its best development ever, but I don't want to, it's definitely, so this is what you want to see long-term for a coin, is continually rising development over time. Some of the top assets that had breakouts in 2020 and 2021, they looked just like this, with more and more development flowing into the network, or the GitHub, I should say. So now let's look at social metrics really quick. Doesn't look like there's much here. So social volume AI saw a huge spike in mid-February, and it's mostly just stayed low since. Mild one here, which is interesting because it happened on the dominant side. So yes, a lot of assets saw increased social volume right at this big dip on the 9th through the 11th, but ICP actually saw a higher percentage of discussions compared to other altcoins on the crypto sector at this time. So there was a little bit of increased attention for ICP, but it stayed pretty low ever since and not much to report. So overall, ICP, at least on the development activity side, I like what I see there as a long-term rising coin with a harder and harder working team there in the background. So that's about all we can report for ICP. Now let's head over to BNB for our final coin of the day here. So let's go to the last 3 months, got rid of some of those huge outlier spikes. Circulation, not much to say. We had a huge spike on May 22nd, an even huger one on the 19th, both correlated with local tops. So keep in mind, when you see huge circulation of BNB in an isolated fashion like this, and the price is rising, be wary that it could mean that those tokens are being moved for the purpose of selling. As far as daily active addresses go, continued slide. If we go back to the last year, all of the daily active addresses really congregated in late October, early November. This was, of course, when Bitcoin and Ethereum had their all-time highs right around there. And BNB was really no exception. I would say it's an obvious concern that daily active addresses are very low on BNB. But remember, this is the native token for the largest crypto exchange in the world. and there's always going to be a market for it. And even though it's slid 3,442 daily active addresses as of today, where it averages, yeah, the average has been around 11,500. So it's not going anywhere, but we'd like to see utility start to pick up if we're going to see a big run like this. As far as MVRV goes, we'll mark the negative 15% line right about, boom, there. We're sitting at about a little under negative 6% or over negative 6%, which is indicating a slightly better than average time and less risky than usual in terms of adding onto your investment or opening a new position. Last time we got below the opportunity zone line, like many other altcoins, was in this second and third week of May. And prices did not really show much bounce sign, a little bit, but really, as long as you were in only during the time when we were below this opportunity zone line, you likely did pretty well if you just made sure to get out right after, especially once it got above 0% temporarily. That was right at the local top. So that would have been a pretty good leading indicator there. Bottom here, and bottom here. So BNB has actually done a great job of predicting through MVRV when prices will bottom and when they'll top up here as well. So right now, better than average sign, but more neutral than a huge opportunity. Weighted sentiment probably isn't being talked about much, but we are in mostly negative range, and it's been almost all negative outside of 3 weeks. It's been negative sentiment for BNB every single week since December 24th. So that's pretty significant. We're talking about over 6 months of data, and only 3 weeks have been positive during that stretch. When it actually did have that positive spike, that was right before the local top happened, where prices then proceeded to plummet. Prices are down a little bit, but unlike a lot of other coins, it's not at or below its big drop that it saw in the second week of May. But I do like to see that it's still in negative range, if only a little bit right now. If we switch over to, I'll get back to whales in a moment. If we switch over to social dominance and volume, nothing too special to report. We did have a big interest spike happen last week, maybe more like 10 days ago. And dominance did get up to its highest point. We're going way back, yeah. So dominance just hit its highest point since August 4th-ish or so. And that was a pretty big deal. It indicated that people were having some renewed interest in BNB during this big upswing here, even though a lot of coins were having at least a mild upswing around this time. And now it's sitting pretty close to neutral, with dominance up maybe slightly more than usual at the moment. So there is some interest in BNB still, and it's getting about 6.5% of discussions related to crypto assets within the top 100 right now. So maybe a little bit something there and worth keeping an eye on. Age consumed, ratio of profit loss, anything here? Not really. It does look like there's a bit of capitulation happening with the line here. So pretty much the last 7 days or so, 6 days or so, there is more loss happening than profit. And that's a good sign. We want to see the losses continue to mount and avoid big bars like this. Whale transactions are staying pretty low. Now let's take a quick look at supply distribution to see if there's whales actually accumulating. The price of BNB is just under 300. So we're going to want to go down to about 1,000 all the way to 100,000 coin addresses to give us an idea of what they are doing at the moment. Let me zoom out. We'll do the last year. So interesting stuff. It's a pretty small percentage that this tier holds. So I may want to expand it. We'll go to 100 to 100,000, see if that makes a little bit of difference. Not really. We'll try the other end and go 1,000 all the way up to 1,000,000 BNB held. Okay, this seems to have a little bit of alpha with the price. So we're going to take a look at this. You can see when prices were up really high, that's when these 1,000 to 1,000,000 coin addresses were also up high. And pretty much ever since, they have, in waves, dropped off some of their BNB. And it does look like there's a little bit of pretty much the largest dump that we've seen since mid-September, and holding 11% after holding about 12.4% is a pretty steep drop. The biggest drop happened, interestingly, in mid-July, and right after, prices boomed. So, you know, there's not always going to be perfect alpha with this tier here, but they did get in after the big drop and started accumulating on the way up there. So I would keep an eye on this tier. I think it has some good alpha. BNB is, of course, a top 6 or so asset right now on the market cap side. So it's always going to have a ton of volume, a ton of action, considering it's representing the largest exchange in the world. Development activity, not much, interestingly. I didn't know that BNB was pretty much not getting any GitHub activity, but that's probably a little bit alarming, even though it's just a native token.
Just not open sourced. Actually, Gary, I don't know. Maybe we can include, at least for the Binance Smart Chain, some activity.
Yeah.
But generally, whatever they're doing, because it is Binance Exchange, it's, for obvious reasons, they don't open source their code. Not to make it too simple to hack them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. They probably want to keep things pretty proprietary. So we touched on dominance and volume. Anything else we can touch on? Whale transactions don't appear to be too active either. So yeah, BNB doesn't look like it has any promising signals at the moment either. It would be nice if we saw, you know, a little more weighted sentiment down. The MVRV being down is a good sign, but it isn't down a ton. And the fact that circulation and daily active addresses are so dormant right now, a bit concerning there. We'd like to see that pick up a little, but yeah, I think we can conclude here. I appreciate the suggestions on altcoins. As always, guys, don't forget to share around any links you find interesting on social media. You have a ref link, and if someone uses your ref link that you can find in your account settings, you get 25 to 35% of the commission of their purchase of Sandbase Pro. And as we get into the summer here, guys, I just encourage everyone to take a close look at the metrics we touched on today. Gary can leave the link to this template so you can all check out the same stuff that we're looking at. Remember, it needs to be an ERC20 or, you know, a few exceptions like Bitcoin, BNB, Bitcoin Cash, or Litecoin.
Polygon Matic.
Those will have full metrics.
Cardano.
Yeah.
Actually, it's quite increasing the list of traffic.
Good point. Yeah, Cardano, and I forget about Polygon as well. So there's quite a few different assets you can look at where you'll have the full metrics here. But if you have any other questions about how to use things, don't forget to drop your questions in the general channel. Tag me or Maxim or Gary, and we're all happy to help, okay? So with that said, guys, I wish you all a great weekend. Appreciate the time, and I will talk to you probably on my next video I'll be releasing soon.